this on silence. All right. Discussion. All right. All right. Now to start with, our motivation of course should be bodhicitta. For that we need great compassion. And for that, well, today let's remember the fact that, well, sentient beings are changing all the time. So there's no reliable situation in samsara. It keeps changing, everything keeps changing. So sentient beings in samsara, they just keep changing. Nothing reliable. Their bodies, of course, keep changing, getting older. I wonder whether it would be nicer if they got younger. Become a baby again? No. Either way, becoming younger or older, those changes are difficult to cope with. Their minds are changing. They feel good, then they don't feel good, and so on. They're grumpy, bad mood, things go well for them, then that changes. So that constant change is explained to be a part of why we suffer, why sentient beings suffer. And at the same time, sentient beings, and of course we include ourselves, but we try to generate compassion for other sentient beings here. So in that sense, there is no inherent I, there's no intrinsic I, but they hold on to an intrinsic I. They believe so strongly that there is this independent, self-sufficient I, which, and not just self-sufficient, but also inherent, independent I, which leads to the sense that their I is more precious than that of others, which in turn gives rise to self-centeredness and endless suffering from that, or because of that. So therefore, there's so much suffering because, well, first of all, not understanding things are impermanent, not understanding the actual nature of phenomena, that which is in actuality permanent, perceiving that to be, that which is in actuality impermanent, perceiving it to be permanent, that which doesn't have a self, perceiving that to be a self, and that's it. Those two views and some others that arise from these lead to so much suffering. So think how sentient beings are drowning in this ocean of ignorance, ocean of wrong views, of misconceptions, thinking that which brings them suffering brings them happiness. So if we reflect on that, let's see whether we can generate that sincere, loving attitude. May all sentient beings be free from these types of sufferings. So let's meditate on that for a moment. Remember that sentient beings have no control when it comes to their wrong views and misconceptions. Constantly creating the causes for future problems. So let's generate this sincere aspiration. May every living being be free from their misconceptions and all the suffering it gives rise to. And may I personally be able to help them overcome their misconceptions. May I be able to help them find a way to overcome suffering and its causes. And since we can only achieve this realistically if we attain the enlightened state of a Buddha, the omniscient state of a Buddha, let's generate the sincere aspiration to become Buddhas for the benefit of all sentient beings. So with this motivation, let's recite the prayers. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that hold some close and others distant. Okay, great. Now, before returning to the text, I have a question. We spoke a lot about what's it called? The sense of endearment or affectionate love, as it's called. Now, before we can generate bodhicitta, just to remind you, we need certain states of mind that precede bodhicitta. We need, first of all, a sense of closeness and a feeling of endearment, a sense of affection for sentient beings. First of all, closeness, feeling close towards other sentient beings as we would feel towards ourselves, but also a sense of endearment, because just as we consider ourselves very important and precious and therefore do everything to remove our sufferings and find happiness, now we try to generate that same kind of closeness towards others and a sense of sentient beings being precious, sentient beings being endearing, sentient beings regarding sentient beings, as Geshe Thupten Jinpa puts it here, having this esteem and respect for sentient beings. And then based on that, when we reflect on their sufferings, then we can generate great compassion, the aspiration for them to be free from suffering, which then grows stronger, gives rise to the altruistic resolve. I'll do whatever I can to remove the suffering. I left it out from the meditation we did before, but usually that's included. And then bodhicitta. Okay? So, great compassion we discussed in detail. The resolve is not really discussed much, because after you want for sentient beings to be free from suffering, It's just that resolve, like, I'll do whatever I can to bring this about. Not difficult to understand. So endearment, okay, endearment, or that sense of endearment or affectionate love that precedes bodhicitta, that I think is clear from everything we discussed. But Lama Tsongkhapa also talks about two techniques to generating. So this is something we need to familiarize ourselves with. We're not born with this sense of endearment. Towards all sentient beings, it requires meditations, analytical meditation, reasons why it makes sense, why endearment makes sense versus indifference. Indifference doesn't make any sense. Due to our strong connection with all sentient beings, it doesn't make any sense to ignore them. We can't be without them. We can't live without them. We're dependent on them. They're dependent on us. They're a part of us. So ignoring them is kind of ignoring ourselves. In the end, it comes down to that. So in the text, it talks about ignoring a part of your body. If you ignore your hand suddenly, right, and you I don't know, you let it burn, you let it be cut, your whole body's going to have a problem, since everything is interconnected. Your body parts are all interconnected. So similarly here, if we ignore other sentient beings, we basically ignore ourselves. I mean, indirectly we harm ourselves. All right, so therefore it makes sense to have that kind of endearment. But how do we get there? How do we come to understand that it makes sense? Well, there are two techniques. One technique is recognizing that since beginningless time, all sentient beings have been our mother and so forth. No need to go into that right now. And there's this other technique of equalizing and exchanging self and others. Now my question is, and this is because there's a debate, some of the geshes, for instance, in the big monasteries, like in Drepunglo's Ling, for instance, there's one particular geshe who argues, actually, exchanging self for others comes afterwards, comes after endearment. He argues, he actually gives a quote, I looked it up, there's an English translation of this text, mind training like the rays of the sun, by Horten Namgyapel. Horten Namgyapel was a close disciple of Lama Tsongkhapa, and he composed this beautiful text on Lojong. And this particular geshe, he argues, he says, it says here, although in reality all sentient beings are not your mother, not right now, obviously, by meditating on recognizing them as your mother, remembering their kindness and wishing to repay them, or wishing to repay that kindness, generate a sense of their being attractive, or that affectionate love. Generate that sense of affectionate love. According to the training that follows the exalted Shantideva's tradition, which is equalizing and exchanging self and others, according to that tradition, once we have grasped the many disadvantages of the self-centered attitude, we will be inclined to give it up, and realizing the many benefits of appreciating others, we will generate a sense of sentient beings who are the object of our concern as being attractive, pleasing, endearing, and so forth. Attractive is a weird translation, it's an older translation, so endearing, etc. Now to me, that doesn't say anything other, and in Tibetan, I looked it up in Tibetan, it doesn't say anything other than the two techniques to generating that sense of affectionate love or a sense of endearment. One is equalizing and exchanging self with others, exchanging self for others. But, actually, the quote, I don't accept that this quote establishes what this particular geshe is arguing. But equalizing and exchanging self for others, or self and others, what does that even mean? Is that just that feeling of closeness, or does it go further? Does it go further? What do you think? What is this? I mean, how do you get to equalizing and exchanging self and others? What are the steps? I mean, we know exactly what the steps are to understanding all sentient beings have been our mother. That's the first step. Becoming aware of their kindness, and then wishing to repay that kindness. Okay, and then that sense of endearment. Although I'm sometimes wondering, recognizing that kindness, then that sense of endearment, and then wanting to repay that kindness works somehow better in my mind, right? So first, recognizing all sentient beings have been extremely close to me, then recognizing what they've done to me in so many different lives, then a sense of endearment, followed by, I want to repay that kindness. I'm just wondering, right? But we could also switch it around. Maybe you start with like, oh, they've been so kind, I want to do something for them. And because you want to do something for them, you feel close to them. That's also possible, maybe, right? But we should debate this. We shouldn't just accept it the way it is, but keep an open mind. This is debated. We can debate it here. You can debate it on your own. Anyway, so that's with regard to the first technique of recognizing all sentient beings have been your mother. What about the second one? What are the stages of meditation? Well, I mean, you've probably done the meditation. What does it consist of? How many steps? What kind of steps are there? Anyone? Any steps that... At least 5 steps. There are at least 5 steps.
Equanimity.
Equanimity precedes this.
Right.
Equanimity, right? So before you even...
In that method precedes? No.
Well, there's equanimity that you do before you generate bodhicitta, right? You meditate on equanimity. But there's also, okay, it's included, there's also a sense of, yes, there is a part of where you again focus on, we're equal. I and self and others are equal.
Oh, I meant the one, strangers.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
But that's not part of the, that's also not part of the sixfold.
It's a prerequisite.
It's a prerequisite to both.
They all want happiness and don't want
Exactly,
suffering.
yes.
But for the other one, the...
Equalizing, exchanging self for others is
Yes.
also a prerequisite.
Is it? I thought it's the first. Sorry.
Well,
With strangers, enemies and friends.
well, usually before we set out to generate bodhicitta, equanimity is mentioned. But that is usually not part of the method as such. So whether you take equalizing, exchanging self with others, or you take the sevenfold causes, the sevenfold causes and effects, whether you take these, equanimity has to precede them. And it's usually not mentioned because it's not unique to the universal vehicle. It's not unique. So that should precede it. Just that we get a bit of a sense of equanimity, right? Equanimity, like, don't feel too attached. Especially, it's not just about our aversion towards some sentient beings. Another problem is our attachment towards sentient beings, right? We're so attached to them. So to let go of that attachment, to have like an equal sense towards sentient beings, that is the prerequisite. And then when it comes to equalizing and exchanging self with others, or self for others, what is the first step? It's actually not. According to the commentaries I've read, there's actually another step, the first step. What is it?
And you mentioned already the demerits of cherishing self,
Yeah.
and the merits of cherishing others.
The disadvantages of self-cherishing. First we think about just self-centeredness, thinking I'm more precious than everyone else. What are the disadvantages? I've been guided by that since beginning this time. Not only did I not benefit other sentient beings, right? Or did I not fulfill the goal, the goal of ultimate happiness for others? I didn't even benefit myself. I just harmed myself all the time. So to reflect on that in great detail. Secondly, the advantages of cherishing others, right? So there's so many beautiful quotes. For instance, Shantideva says, whatever suffering there is in the world arises from desire for only one's own personal happiness. If I only look after all the suffering it's as easy as that. You want to know why we suffer? Well, because of our self-centered attitude. Just putting our happiness before that of others. And then the other way around, whatever happiness there is in the world, derives from wishing for wishing for happiness for others, or wishing for others to be happy. For instance, there's a text called Lama Chöpa. In there, the first Panchen Lama, Losang Chökyi Gyaltsen, he says, cherishing all mother beings is the basis of all positive qualities, right? So, based on those, or the self-cherishing attitude is the entrance to all misery, or the self-centered attitude. He also says, the first Panchen Lama Losang Chökyi Gyaltsen, he says also, it's the entrance to all suffering. So if we reflect on that, wow, okay, all right, do I really want to continue doing this? Do I want to be self-centered, etc.? Or do I want to cherish other sentient beings instead? And then, well, no, actually the first step is identifying the self-centered attitude. I forgot that one. Identifying the self-centered attitude. What is it? In Tibetan, it actually says cherishing myself. But there are some lamas, like for instance, some geshes, for instance, Geshe Pandit Dawa. He says, actually there's no problem with cherishing ourselves. We should cherish ourselves. But here we're talking about that extreme cherishing. Of course we need to also, we can't neglect ourselves. It's not about totally neglecting ourselves, but it's that exaggerated sense of I'm more important, therefore. Okay. So that's the self-cherishing attitude. Then come the shortcomings of the self-centered attitude and the advantages of the attitude cherishing others. And then comes, well, actually self and others are equal, right? What makes me more... So previously equanimity was all sentient beings are equal. But here I bring myself in, mainly, right? I and others, what's the difference? On a conventional level, the usual reflection, everything I've got is because of other sentient beings. Everything I learned is because of other sentient beings. I wouldn't be anything, so I owe everything to others on a spiritual and worldly level. And even ultimately, on an ultimate level, if I think of I enable I in relation to this mind here, right? But your I, from your perspective, in fact, there are a lot more eyes than this eye, right? Actually, if I leave out that perspective, there are a lot more eyes. Why is that one eye that I'm so concerned about, right? Of course, I do experience suffering. That mind experiences suffering, not the suffering of other sentient beings. But in the end, that's also brought in connection with the I, of course. If it was just that sensation, without sense of I was harmed, I am suffering, it would just be a sensation, and it wouldn't necessarily lead to the sense of my happiness is more important than everyone else's, right? So if we really think about this, self and others are equal. And then we exchange self with others. But what is really exchanged? What happens here? Lama Tsongkhapa actually explains it in his Lamrim Chamu. Quite in a way that we may not expect. He says, the phrases exchanging self and others do not indicate a training in an attitude which thinks I'm others or others are mine, obviously, right? I mean, that would be absurd. They indicate a change in the orientation of the two states of mind, of cherishing yourself and neglecting others, wherein you develop the attitude of cherishing others as you presently do yourself and neglecting yourself as you presently do others, right? So it's not totally neglecting. I mean, neglecting is maybe too strong of a word. But the attitude, you basically exchange that attitude. Others means, I don't care. I care only about myself. Others, I don't care. Or not really, only secondary. This should be turned around. This should be turned around. So exchanging self for others means that self-cherishing, I now take others and I put them as number one and myself secondary. That's more than that's more than, what was it? Endearment, isn't it? Endearment was just bringing it close to myself. But then cherishing, or equalizing and exchanging self for others, that is not just we're all the same and I feel as close to others as I feel to myself. No, it's on top of that, I put myself behind others. Others are before self. So then it makes sense that first you have that sense of endearment, and then you put others before self.
The
clarification?
neglect of myself.
No, not neglect. Neglect is not a good
No,
word.
no.
Okay.
But the neglect in this sense,
Mm-hmm.
could it be that instead of neglect, it's a question of not expecting anything in return?
Yes, partly. Of not expecting anything in return. That's part of it. Yes. So having love and compassion for other, unconditional love.
Unconditional,
Yeah. That's part of it. But it's also realizing, well, I'm just one person, others are countless. So whose happiness is more important? What should I consider to be more important? Others' happiness. Myself, of course, it's great. If, as a side effect, I'm happy, great. And of course, I won't neglect myself because I need to be strong and healthy to work for the benefit of others. However, putting others before self in that way, for two reasons. One way, to come to a balanced state. Because so far, we've been out of balance. It's been I, me, and mine, right? We're so out of whack. Is that a good way of saying it? We've been so, right? So now, as like a counterbalance, we put others before self, just to train the mind. Of course, others and self are equally important. But since we're so used to just think of ourselves as more important, I bring that made my mind back into a state of balance. But secondly, honestly, even on a legal level, if it were to be like 10,000 people versus one person, and there are more than 10,000 sentient beings, so obviously I'm just one and there are so many, so then it kind of makes sense in the scheme of like countless sentient beings and me just being one, to put others before self. Anyway, it's just a matter of attitude. It's a matter of attitude. It so relaxes the mind. Think if you just have a few seconds of just cherishing others. What is there to worry? Would you still worry? Because we worry usually about ourselves. Or ours. My friend, my relatives, right? So it really calms the mind. And it shows already, oh, that's the way it should be. Our mind is supposed to be calm. We instinctively want it to be calm, so that's the actual nature of our mind. And right, it goes into that calm nature, right? And then, of course, wisdom needs to be applied, and from there on, you then generate great compassion, you generate bodhicitta, and so forth. Okay. But there is something to that debate, isn't there? Where this affection, it doesn't seem as strong from how it is explained. In Tibetan, it just says Chijin Pambalo, which kind of means a mind that cherishes others and finds them endearing, or that cherishes sentient beings and regards them. But there's nothing about letting go of our own sense of self-importance and so forth. Anyway, just food for thought. Just food for thought. And it's good to reflect on this. To keep your mind working and question everything we do. Then there's another debate. Is everyone aware of a correct mind and a wrong mind? Correct mind, wrong mind. Okay. Misconceptions. We have so many of them. I started today's class with, sentient beings suffer so much from so many misconceptions. The first being, of course, believing in an I that doesn't exist inherently, but perceiving it to exist inherently. Perceiving an I that seems self-sufficient, independent. doesn't exist. Perceiving of a permanent I, whereas it's always changing. So many misconceptions. And we need to replace our misconceptions, our wrong views, with correct views. So a wrong view is usually a mind, or it's not, it's always a mind, whose main object doesn't exist. Right? The misconception of myself as existing inherently, inherent existent I doesn't exist. Permanent I doesn't exist. So what about great compassion? Is that a wrong consciousness or a correct mind? It's correct. But its main object doesn't exist. It follows it's not a correct mind because its main object doesn't exist. Because all sentient beings being free from suffering doesn't exist. Oh. So it follows it's a wrong consciousness. Yes?
But the free from suffering exists.
To be free
That's
from suffering.
possible.
In Tibetan, the word is to be free from suffering, as in past. Telwa in Tibetan. So you remember? Oh, this is something I wanted to mention even last time. I told you about the word exist. Remember the word exist? The word exist, I looked it up grammatically. In Tibetan, it doesn't have 3 times. It's not a verb. In Tibetan, in English you would say to exist, an existent, an existence. So you have a noun, an adjective, and a verb. In Tibetan, it's only ever an establishing word, which doesn't mean anything in English grammar, but there's just no word equivalent, and I explain what that means. Or it's a noun. I mistakenly said it was an adjective. Because in Tibetan sometimes it's not obvious, because it seems to be used like an adjective, but it's actually a noun. Existence. Okay? So Yurba in Tibetan, Yurba in Tibetan can be a noun, or it can be an establishing word. So what does that even mean? Well, an establishing word does not show action and transformation. So he always says exist, exist, exist. That's why you don't have to change the tense. You don't have a way to say in Tibetan, it was existent, right? Or did exist. You only know by using words such as previously. Previously it exists. In the future it exists. So it doesn't change. In English, of course, when you translate it, you'd always change it according to the tenses in English. But in Tibetan, it's always, it exists now, it exists in the past, it exists in the future, right? Anyway, that's just an interesting way. Also, there are other words that in English would be verbs, like to be. In English, in Tibetan, it's also one of those establishing words. It doesn't change. It's yin, 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 right? Or du, or je. Anyway, these are just certain words. And once you learn Tibetan, it's actually easier for us. We don't need to know the 3 tenses of these words, right? Whereas in English, you have to know the 3 tenses of be, right? Or of exist, to exist, existed. Okay, that's pretty easy. But the point is, whether it's easy or not, but there are certain words that don't change. But the word be free from, to be separated from, has 3 times. And here the definition of great compassion is, may all sentient beings be separated, past tense, from suffering. And that is separated. May they be separated. So it's the wish for all sentient beings to be separated from suffering. So that's the main object. Sentient beings being separated from suffering. But all sentient beings being separated will be separated. That's different. But being separated doesn't exist. Yes?
Maybe it's a difference between an aspiration and cognizing as such?
Yes, that's the difference. Very good. That's the difference. There are certain... A wrong mind, not only does its main object not exist, it's mistaken with regard to it. It believes it to exist, in other words. I think that's what you're saying. Yeah. Whereas there are a lot of minds where what your main object, you wish for something that right now is not the case, but it's part of your practice. There are definitely 2 examples you can come up with. I say Dong Len. Right? Dong Len. I mean, you visualize you're taking the suffering of all sentient beings and you give them all your happiness. That's not a wrong consciousness, because it's not like you're holding on to that being true. You're not believing it to be true. You use it, it's beneficial. Yeah, you know it doesn't exist right now, but you still hold on to it as part of your meditation, knowing it's not realistic. In the case of the three types of bodhicitta, of which only one, right? We discussed it before in class. Ferryman-like bodhicitta, or shepherd-like bodhicitta, and king-like bodhicitta. Bodhicitta where you wish, may all sentient beings become enlightened first and may I be last. How am I going to take them to enlightenment if it's me last? Right? Like a shepherd who walks behind the flock of sheep. Yeah, so it's really just realistic, like first we become enlightened and then help all sentient beings to reach that same state. That's the only realistic scenarios, but still we can meditate on it that way. So in a similar way, we don't know, we know all sentient beings are not free from suffering, but we wish for it, right? So this is slightly different. We don't visualize they're all free from suffering, but it's still, our main object doesn't exist and we wish for them to be free from suffering. Yeah, so that's that difference. So when you first hear it in debate, it's like regarding the subject, great compassion, it follows as a wrong consciousness. You go, no. And then when you think about it, well, actually it is. So what is a wrong consciousness? I mean, no, so what? No, shouldn't say so what. It's not a wrong consciousness. Its main object doesn't exist, but so what? Doesn't make it a wrong consciousness. All right. Okay. So then let's go back to the text. Those were just a few debates and there are more. I prepared some more debates. If you go to page 62, 62 in the Kindle version, 67 in the PDF, and 52 in the book. In the book. Is it right? Is it 50? Oh yeah, well, let me first read it. These pronouncements betray a lack of correct understanding of the focal object versus the cognitive aspect. Do you find that? Okay. In both the root text and the commentary. Can you find that? In both the root text and the commentary. It's a new passage. In both the root text and the commentary. The two latter compassions are described. Do you find that? What page is that? 53. 53. Okay, it's not exactly 10 pages, yeah. All right, so let's go back. What did we discuss last time? We spoke about 3 types of great compassion. There's also some debate. Why only 3 types? Why not more? Okay, but without going into that, there's only 3 types. 3 types. The first type is pretty easy. If you generate great compassion, I mean, not easy to generate, easy to understand. So you generate that sincere mind, may all sentient beings, driven by that affection, regard for sentient beings, you then generate the sincere aspiration, may they be free from any type of suffering and its causes. And nothing else. I mean, that's a beautiful, incredible mind. Very important mind. And it's very likely that we start off with that. At the very beginning, it's hard enough to generate this. It's difficult for us because of our habitual self-centered attitude, so it takes time. But over time, of course, you need to not just focus on the method aspect, such as love and compassion, but bring in wisdom. Without wisdom, it's like a one-winged bird, as the analogy goes, right? You need 2 wings to fly. Similarly, in order to progress on the spiritual path, you need method and wisdom. What wisdom refers to, I guess, is pretty clear. A mind that understands things as they are, right? Well, wisdom. Wisdom versus knowledge. I think Fred told me this. What's the difference between knowledge and wisdom? Knowledge is that a tomato is a fruit, Wisdom is not to put it in your fruit salad. No, that's just a joke. No, there's a difference between knowledge, of course, and wisdom. Okay, so wisdom starts with knowledge. First, you learn about something, you learn about it, you think about it further, internalize it, until it makes perfect sense to you. And it makes sense to you to such a degree that now it changes the way you think. And then it turns into wisdom. Does that make sense? So knowledge is more like knowing about something. Wisdom is knowing. Does that make sense? I mean, knowing, like, it's no longer dependent on the information you get from someone else, but based on the information you got from yourself, then including logical reasoning, your own experience, you bring that in, your understanding deepens to such a degree that then it comes from your own mind. It no longer depends on anyone else. You think along these lines, you innately feel this to be true. This is not how it's defined usually, but the definition here in this case, I don't think would be helpful, but maybe for an understanding, if you look at wisdom this way, that's helpful. Anyway, so wisdom is extremely important. Method. Why is it called method? It's in Tibetan, it's tap. Tap is also means or method. So love, compassion, anything that is not part of the wisdom category, it's part of the emotional aspect, that's called method. I asked that question before, I think it was answered. It's a little difficult to say, but it's basically, I think Venerable Yandu said it, it's like when you utilize the wisdom, you combine it with the understanding, it's the method that then makes that wisdom effective. Love, compassion, and so forth. Due to this, you can use wisdom in such an effective way that it helps you to transform your mind and spiritually progress. Okay, anyway, so method here is not enough. Great compassion is part of the method side. Now you need to combine method and wisdom. By focusing on all sentient beings, for instance, or not just for instance, focusing on all sentient beings and recognizing that they are impermanent. If you generate that mind, sentient beings are impermanent, so you generate that kind of mind, and then generate great compassion, you have two minds running parallel. First, you have the mind realizing the impermanence of sentient beings. It's active in your mental continuum. And then, running parallel, at the same time, you generate great compassion. For those who were not here last time, I told you before that the mind that realizes the impermanence of sentient beings, it becomes dormant when great compassion becomes active. That was wrong. It was too mind-boggling. Somehow I neglected my notes, I neglected what was in the text. But in actuality, at a certain point, we are able to have two minds, two mental consciousnesses running parallel with the same strength. So one being, the mind realizing sentient beings are impermanent, and the other being great compassion, focusing on all sentient beings and wishing them to be free from suffering. Okay, and they enhance each other. So, what Lama Tsongkhapa here is very clear about, he says, great compassion doesn't change. Your focal object, in terms of great compassion, is all sentient beings. The aspect is free from suffering, thinking may there be free from suffering, that's the aspect of that mind, the main object basically. And on the other hand, you have all sentient beings, again the focus being the same, but the aspect here is for them to be free from suffering. And those have two different aspects, so it couldn't be one mind. You can't have one mind focusing on sentient beings, one single mind that perceives them to be changing moment by moment and wishes them to be free from suffering. One mind can't do that. One mind cannot do that. Right? So you cannot, for instance, you can't have one mind. Oh, Buddha's mind is different, by the way, sentient beings. So You can't have a mind, for instance, that perceives the emptiness of sentient beings and their impermanence. Or a mind that perceives sentient beings to come from Tibet and to be impermanent. There are different aspects. So the focal object sentient beings, in both cases, if we discuss that single mind. So focusing on sentient beings in both cases, but that one single mind at the same time perceiving them to be impermanent and to be from Tibet doesn't work. But then there's a debate. Yes?
Can you have more than two minds simultaneously?
Yes, you can. You can have more than one mind. You can have two mental consciousnesses. Like I said last time.
Can you have more than two?
More than two. I haven't come across an explanation where you have more than two. So, I don't know. Two, you can. Maybe you can. I mean, the more you advance, the more you're able to. Yeah, it's not. That's why I'm not that comfortable with it, to be honest.
Not really uncomfortable.
Yeah, I know. I'm not that comfortable with that, honestly. But it is on an advanced level. The commentaries definitely talk about having bodhicitta and holding onto the inherent existence of sentient beings. You can have one wrong consciousness holding onto the inherent existence of sentient beings and have it running parallel also bodhicitta, a correct mind. That's possible, but okay, one is a wrong consciousness and one is a correct mind. However, here in this case, the texts are very clear. Both run parallel, exist at the same time. But it doesn't mention a third one, so I don't know. Okay. But anyway, having said that, now you have these two. But you couldn't have these two perceptions happen with one mind simultaneously, wishing sentient beings to be free from suffering and at the same time recognizing their impermanence. Impossible. Now then there's a debate. Okay, there's a debate. It comes a little later. There's a quote later on in this text when it says, let me find the quote. It's on page 238 in the Kindle version, so -10 for the 238, so 239 or 229 or 227 in the book, and 272 in the PDF file. So in there, let me find the quote first of all. In there it says that attachment and, just a sec, need to find it first. 238, yep. Okay, here it is. 230. Okay. Okay, here it talks about delusion. Delusion is actually, and it says here, refers to grasping at true or inherent existence. So delusion here means grasping at true existence. Attachment, and here it says in this particular quote, it says that attachment and aversion are accompanied by grasping at true existence, by grasping at inherent existence. They're accompanied by ignorance, in other words. So whenever you have attachment, one of the mental factors, one of its functions is to hold on to inherent existence. Okay? All right. So our attachment, when I'm attached, it's true for attachment and aversion. It only mentions those two. And then minds that are other afflictions that are a type of attachment or a type of aversion. Give me examples of a type of affliction, mental affliction, that is not called attachment, but it's a type of attachment.
Pride.
Very good. Pride. Arrogance. Arrogance, yes. Pride can sometimes be something positive, depending on how you translate it, but yeah, pride or arrogance, actually. I'm so much better than everyone else. That comes from comes from a self-attachment. Can you give me another example where attachment is a part of that affliction, but resentment is too?
Jealousy.
Jealousy, very good. Envy. Envy is 2 in 1. It's 2 in 1. In what way? Well, if I'm envious, envy versus jealousy, right? I mean, I'm not saying jealous when, I don't know, your boyfriend or girlfriend talks to another man or woman. That's, in the strictest sense, that's jealousy. That's also based on attachment. But envy is attachment. I have attachment for what? For that bigger car. I'm attached to that bigger car and resent my neighbor for having it. Right? I resent. So what is envy? I resent someone for having that which I'm attached to. Does that make sense? Yeah, I want something so badly, and because this other person gets it and I don't, I'm envious. So it's 2 in 1. So there are quite a few afflictions where you have aversion. Aversion is part of it. So spite, resentment, holding a grudge, and so forth. There you have aversion as part of this mental affliction. And similarly, you have a lot of afflictions, mental afflictions. Part of them is attachment. Attachment is part of them. So in those cases, the mind that perceives inherent existence is always a part of them. But because it's associated with, it's accompanied with that mental factor, they have the same object. Doesn't that mean you have 2 different apprehended aspects that are different? Because what does attachment perceive? It exaggerates the positive qualities of the object of attachment. Remember, we talked about Aaron Beck, the modern day cognitive scientist who His Holiness the Dalai Lama always mentions, who said that when we get angry, for instance, 90% of what we perceive is a projection. We project the negative aspects when we get angry. So similarly with attachment, 90% of what we are attached to, or 90% of the positive qualities of the object of attachment are just a projection. So in other words, we exaggerate the positive qualities of that. Does everyone agree with attachment? Do you agree? Okay, if you didn't, I'd tell you a funny story, but never mind, you agree. I tell you, you have heard it so many times. I ran out of good funny stories. No, I've heard it many times. No, when I was in school, when I was like 15 or 16, I had a grudge. I fell in, I didn't fall in love. What do you call that? I had a crush on someone. Right? Just this guy, and he didn't know me really, and I was too shy to talk to him. But the thing was, like, I thought he was so amazing. And my attachment was so strong, I thought even his backpack was amazing. It was like everything about him, his family, everything. They couldn't do anything wrong. So even his backpack, it was just an ordinary backpack. If he had belonged to the guy I thought was the jerk, I wouldn't have, same backpack. So it's just showing, it was like, whoa. And of course, the story then ends, he went for a year abroad, study abroad, like it was part of our high school, to go to the US and study in a high school. Anyway, I forgot about him. When he came back, I was thinking, what did I see in him? Right? It was the sense like, what was that magic, that backpack and everything? I couldn't understand it because that attachment was gone. So I totally exaggerated the positive qualities of that person. So that's just, for me, it's like the example because it was so like in my face. The point is, therefore, our attachment exaggerates the positive aspects. But then at the same time, it perceives inherent existence. Those are different aspects. How can you make it work? How does that work? So aren't they different apprehended aspects? And we've heard here it's impossible. You can't at the same time wish for all sentient beings to be happy, to be free from suffering, and perceive them to be impermanent. That's impossible. So likewise, you cannot perceive them to be super attractive and to be inherently existent. That wouldn't work. So how can you have a single mind that is conjoined, that is part, or not conjoined, that is associated or accompanied by the mental factor of ignorance, grasping at true existence, and at the same time be that type of attachment? What is the answer to that? Anyone?
comes before the other.
One comes before the other. No. I have to try to make those work here now. No. How can you bring those two together? Inherent existence and super duper attractive or super duper amazing. That exaggerated, yes.
Maybe like inherently attractive?
That's it. Very good. Inherently attractive. Inherently super duper great. Yeah, that's it. That's it. So when we're attached, not only do we exaggerate the positive qualities of that person, but it seems inherently to be this incredible quality. And how about aversion? Similarly, now just the opposite way, right? It's the opposite way.
So that
They're inherently terrible, yes.
That exaggerates the negative.
Yes, exactly. But not just that, how does inherent existence comes in? How does that come in? Inherent existence, how does that come in?
Because you're attached to it.
No, inherently. So bring inherent existence. And so previously he said with the attachment, you perceive inherent existence by perceiving this attractiveness as inherently attractive. So what about the negative qualities? Inherently negative. Yeah, it's not just conventionally, no, it's inherently negative. So in this way, it works. So that would be if you debate, first you hear like, oh, inherent existence is also conceived, like perceived, plus what's perceived that's super duper positive, like extremely positive, extremely negative. Yes, we make it work. Our mind can bring lots of wrong views, make it two into one, bring this, well, ignorance, that misconception, and perceiving that person as inherently negative or positive. Okay, great, very good. Okay, so these are just some debates. If you, they're not like super long because you basically found the answer, but some food for thought. But what else did we hear? The second type of compassion, conjoined with the mind realizing impermanence. It can also be conjoined with what? It's only an example here. What is it? What is the exact quote? Let me just go back. I need to find it first. The phrase impermanent sentient beings is only an illustration. It's only one example. Taking sentient beings devoid of self-sufficient substantial reality as an object can also be referred to the second type. Okay, the second type of compassion, what is it called? Compassion that takes phenomenal reality as its object. Or compassion that focuses on phenomenal reality. That's really more of a literal translation. So you have compassion that focuses only on sentient beings. That's the first type. At that time, you have no other mind running parallel. No wisdom mind running parallel. That's the first type. The second type is called great compassion that focuses on phenomenal reality. To put it in different words, great compassion that is directly conjoined with a mind realizing the impermanence of sentient beings. Directly conjoined. It runs parallel. Conjoined. Remember, conjoined. It always means enhancing each other. Directly conjoined. If one mind is directly conjoined with another mind, both minds are active. Both minds are manifest. Right? If one mind is indirectly conjoined with another mind, this other mind lies dormant. Two cases. Two minds being conjoined. Minds being conjoined are actually always mental consciousnesses. They're always mental consciousnesses. You don't talk of sense consciousnesses being conjoined. How would you enhance an eye consciousness? Right? It just is or not. Either you have an eye consciousness or not. There's no enhancement as such. You don't talk about enhancement. But mental consciousnesses are, of course, enhanced. So mental consciousnesses can be enhanced by other minds. In particular, when we talk about virtuous minds like great compassion, love, and so forth, they can be conjoined with wisdom, the wisdom realizing emptiness, for instance. If they're directly conjoined, then compassion and that wisdom realizing emptiness exist at the same time. They run parallel, right? They exist at the same time and they enhance each other. The wisdom enhances the mind realizing emptiness, and the mind realizing emptiness enhances wisdom. And they're both there directly, both manifestly active. So then they are directly conjoined with each other.
But they're both wisdom. You said emptiness.
And compassion.
Okay.
And compassion.
But when you have a direct experience of emptiness...
Wait. Just a sec, I'm going into that. So, directly conjoined. Mind knowing emptiness, conceptually, and compassion. But then there are also minds when one mind is actively there, but the other lies dormant. And so that's the example Alan gave, where you realize emptiness directly. At that time, you can't have another mental consciousness, unless you're a Buddha. Because the direct perception of emptiness, it's so difficult to go into that perception. You're totally absorbed into that. None of your other minds are active. I mean, the sense consciousnesses are there, but they're awarenesses to which the object merely appears. Nothing is ascertained. Nothing is actively, nothing is known. Right? Your sense consciousnesses are there. They don't lie dormant. They don't lie dormant. They're not latent because you're awake. The sense consciousnesses are always there as long as you're awake. But many of our sense consciousnesses become awarenesses to which the object appears but is not ascertained. Right now, your body consciousness, well, yeah, now it's stopped. But until the moment I said it, your body consciousness was an awareness to which the object appears but is not ascertained. You're not aware of the smoothness of the fabric you're wearing. Now you're aware. Now that I said it, right? Try to be aware of the fabric you're wearing. Yeah, now. Or the heat in the room. Or the smell in the room, or whatever. Since you're paying attention to what I'm saying, your eye consciousness, your ear consciousnesses, they're active. But the other awarenesses, the other sense consciousnesses, they become awarenesses to which the object merely appears, but is not ascertained. So you have no memory later on of certain smells or certain sensations of the body. Of course, every now and then it may switch. You go, oh, it's so hot in here. Or the shirt is scratchy, or whatever. But then you go back to listening, hopefully. Hopefully. Okay. Anyway, the point is, when you realize emptiness directly, you don't fall asleep. Only when you fall asleep, you faint, or when you're dying, then the sense consciousnesses are no longer active. They're no longer manifest. Yeah? When we're no longer... So in English you say, we become unconscious. But actually in Tibetan, or not in Tibetan, but to be more precise, your coarse consciousness becomes unconscious. Your coarse consciousness no longer functions when you're unconscious. So you could be unconscious due to falling asleep. We're unconscious when we're asleep, due to fainting, being in a coma, or at a certain point as we're dying, we fall unconscious, which is when the coarse consciousness is no longer active and the sense consciousnesses are part of the coarsest consciousness. But unless any of these scenarios occur, the sense consciousnesses are always there. Okay, so they don't lie dormant when you realize emptiness directly. But all your mental consciousnesses, any other mind, can only lie dormant. Any other mind. So if before realizing emptiness directly you were meditating on compassion, at the time of meditating on compassion, you didn't have a mind realizing emptiness directly. And if you realize emptiness directly, you don't have a mind of compassion being active. But they're conjoined with each other. If, when you meditate on compassion, you previously realized emptiness already, then when you rise from that meditative state and you now meditate on compassion, then that mind realizing emptiness lies dormant. but it still enhances your compassion. So they're still conjoined, but indirectly conjoined. Indirectly conjoined means that compassion at that time that is active, being indirectly conjoined with the mind realizing emptiness, that means that the mind realizing emptiness lies dormant. It's latent, it's not active, it lies dormant. But it still has an influence on the mind. Without being active. It's a strong, powerful mind, and it can still have a profound effect on other minds. So do you understand this idea of conjoined? Conjoined always means when two minds are conjoined, it means they enhance each other. When one mind is directly conjoined, so when mind A is directly conjoined with mind B, that means both are actively there. When mind A is indirectly conjoined with mind B, it means mind B lies dormant. Okay? It's just a way of saying it. The way you use the word conjoined points out at which mind is active and which mind lies dormant. So when you realize emptiness directly, a bodhisattva who realizes emptiness directly, that is mind A, which is indirectly conjoined with bodhicitta. Yes. Yeah, or great compassion. Exactly. In this person's mind, great compassion or bodhicitta enhances that bodhisattva's realization of emptiness, although it's not there. It's not there, and still it has a profound effect on that mind. And the mind, in turn, has a great effect on bodhicitta that lies dormant. So next time it arises, it's grown stronger. This idea of being conjoined, it's just a verb labeled on the basis of the fact that two minds enhance each other. That's why Buddhist practice cannot be one-sided. You always need you need wisdom and method both, because they enhance each other. If one is missing, you can't progress. If one is not there. So if you neglect wisdom and only focus on love and compassion, yeah, you become a nice, compassionate, loving person, but that doesn't mean you're spiritually enhanced. You need to now get an understanding of reality. Right? Reality. I mean, wisdom is just another way of saying gaining a deep understanding of how phenomena really exist. Which is important for us because the reason we have so many problems is we have these rude misconceptions. I mean, we perceive of a self. Of course, there is a self, there's a conventional self, but the self we perceive is not the one that is there. Which takes me to something else I discussed last time, and I want to repeat this for those who either forgot or haven't heard me say it before. It's extremely important. Here there are three views described when it comes to the self. Three wrong views. One is the subtlest wrong view when it comes to the self, and the other two views are based on that subtlest view. I was going to look up an example, like an everyday kind of example, I forgot, where there's a profound, kind of a deepest wrong view, which leads to coarser wrong views. Does anyone have an example, like an everyday kind of example? Yeah, I can't think of anything right now. But let's stick to the one, the misperception we're talking about here. So, first of all, the deepest misconception we have of the I is that of an inherently existent I, right? We perceive of something there, in other words, right? So when you teach selflessness for the first time to people who have never heard about it, right? Who are open to it, but have never heard about it. Their first reaction is, yeah, but that's not my experience. There is something there, right? So when they hear there's no self, so they don't think of the conventional self. They don't think of the merely labeled self. They've never heard of that. So that's not the self that they identify as being there. there's something there. There's something, if I were to say, like, if you look for that self, will you find it? The answer will be, of course. If I were to ask you, I remember the first time my mom came to visit here, she read a book by His Holiness in German, and His Holiness analyzed the table, right? Saying, where's the table? And I could see her go read one page and go back and read it again and go back. She read it 3 or 4 times. And then she was like, I don't understand what His Holiness is saying. He says there's no table. So she went through the analysis, like, where's the table? And so I asked you, do you think you can find the table? Well, not the way His Holiness searches for it, but there is a table. So not the way His Holiness was looking for it, but there must be one. So she was convinced there must be something there, because otherwise why would we look for a table? But then when we went through it, she was like, yeah, but you're doing it all wrong. You just see it, it's there. So in the end, there was this really strong sense there must be something there. So I guess that's kind of like, there's something inherent there. There's something there from the side of the object. Because if there was nothing inherent in this table, and in this mat, then what would make this a table and not a mat? Right? If there's nothing there from the side of the object, everything is labeled, what would be the difference between the chair and the table? What would be the difference between me and you? Right? That's how it feels. Yeah, labeling okay. We do call it person, etc. But there must be a slight difference. This is why the Svatantrika school suits us quite well. You know, like Prasangika, yeah, we put on the Prasangika head and we debate and argue like a Prasangika person. But deep within, thank you, Svatantrika, something there, something can be found, right? That's how it feels. Because otherwise, everything labeled, everything becomes possible. Okay, having said this, based on that sense, there's something there, that deepest self-grasping, that gives rise to a coarser self-grasping. A sense of a self, not just something there, but an I that is what? The controller of mind and body. An I that is the utilizer, that utilizes, that uses mind and body. So those are the 2 words you find in the texts, like the self that is something, there's a sense, there's a connection between mind and body, right? There's 2 types of this sense of this using the self. One type is where this utilizer or this controller of mind and body is inseparably linked. So you couldn't separate it, it's linked with them, but it's not identical, right? But there's also a sense that this I exists independently of mind and body. It's the controller, it's in charge, but it exists separately. So it's like a controller that exists separately.
Is that the difference between innate and acquired?
Is that the difference between innate and acquired? Yes, yes. So the one where you believe it exists separately, that's not an innate sense we usually are born with. We have a sense they're connected. But then we may, based on our innate wrong sense of the I, create ideas of like a controller that's in charge now, right? So for instance, when neuroscientists, I talked about it, like some neuroscientists analyzing where's the I in the brain, there must be a separate kind of control center. That is a separate entity, right? It's not part of the other brains. It's like a different part of the brain altogether. It's separate. So that would be like more intellectually based. Or the sense of soul in Christianity, Sigmund Freud's ego and superego, like those are kind of go beyond. Or what I also talked about, go beyond our innate sense of a self. Or the one we discuss mainly because they are mentioned in the Buddhist text, is the sense of a self that existed prior to Buddhism. So many of the spiritual systems in India, they discussed or they asserted a type of self that had 3 qualities. What are the 3 qualities? Huh? Permanent, unitary or partless, and independent. Permanent, partless, and so based on their reasoning, and they accepted reincarnation, but we're aware of the fact that when you're reincarnated, you don't remember. You lose what you've learned in your previous life. It's not like you. Wouldn't that be nice? If we were reincarnated and we had all the knowledge, we would bring everything with us. We could talk, we could read and write. We knew all the mistakes we made. We'd be so much wiser, like elderly people, not necessarily always, but a lot of, sometimes, they learn from their mistakes. Then you're reborn, new body. You don't make the same mistakes again. You don't have to learn everything from scratch. Wouldn't that be amazing? But that doesn't happen. So in many of the non-Buddhist systems, they thought, well, the body is obviously not reincarnated. The mind is also not reincarnated. That was their view. They didn't distinguish between the subtle mind versus the coarse mind. They just said in general, mind doesn't move on. So therefore, the self, there's a self that's reincarnated that is different from mind and body. Mind and body change. They change all the time. But the self doesn't change. There's just one self that goes on. So it's permanent. It is partless or unitary because mind and body have parts. But the self is not a part of them. Self is not a part of them. The self is different. So they have part, and the self, what would be the parts of the self? Mind and body are not it. Right? Therefore, it must be partless. And it must be independent because mind and body are left behind and it goes on. Therefore, it must be permanent, partless, and independent. Does that make sense? Right? If there was such a self, like the soul in Christianity, would that also be permanent, partless, independent? I mean, we don't have a clear notion of the soul. It's mentioned a lot. I mentioned this before also, like when I grew up, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, who was very religious, and she had a picture in the room we slept in. Like that was like my grandfather had passed away, so I slept in my grandfather's bed, and my grandmother next to me, and above her bed she had a huge picture of Jesus with a heart and little wings. Roman Catholic, yeah, Roman Catholic. So hearts like with, and I would ask her, what is this heart with the wings? She said, that's the soul. And so she always told me, your soul, when we die, your soul goes into like, and I always had the soul was a little heart-shaped with these wings, right? So that was my idea of the soul that would go to heaven. And I guess it exists independently. It leaves my mind and my body. Doesn't have any, well, it's got wings. So it's got parts, it's got wings. Never mind. And it's permanent. Yeah, it definitely would be permanent and independent, right? So this is the philosophically acquired view of a permanent, partless, independent self. Now, when you learn about selflessness, you learn about these 3. First of all, there is no inherently existent I. Secondly, there is no I that is like a controller or like a utilizer, which is described as a self-sufficient, substantial I. Self-sufficient, substantially existent I. That's like the controller. And there's also no permanent, partless, independent I. So guess which one is easiest to understand, or the absence of which non-existent self is easiest to understand? What's easiest? Of those 3, what's easiest?
Partless.
Permanent, partless, independent.
Partless.
Yeah, let's take the 3. The permanent, partless, independent, that's the easiest. It's the coarsest, it's the easiest. So coarse and subtle is always used, or usually used, to indicate that something is easier understood. The self is not permanent, right? It's not independent, partless. It's impossible. Does that make sense? So there's no permanent, partless, independent self. And so what Lama Tsongkhapa says here, once you understand that sentient beings are impermanent, then you understand at the very least that there cannot be a self that is all three, permanent, partless, independent. You've negated permanent. So the other ones you're still left with. You may still believe there's a partless and independent self. You may still believe that. But then as you further continue, you understand there is no such a self. Right? And what's the next step then? Once you understand that, what is then of the last two you're left with? The self-sufficient, substantially existent, or in other words, the controller kind of person thing, or inherent existence? What is easier to understand? That there's no self-sufficient, substantial I, or there's no inherent I? What's easier? The first one?
The devoid of self-sufficient.
Exactly. There is no self-sufficient, substantially existent I. We did talk about two versions. One where this controller exists independent of mind and body. That's pretty straightforward. If they existed independent, why would I age? My body ages, I don't need to age, right? There's no relation between the two. But even if I were to establish a relationship between the two, and we sometimes, I think, we have a sense that they can exist independently. It's acquired, but it's based... Remember, I told you also this example. I remember in second grade, there was a girl that I really admire. I remember I told you, some of you know this story, that I really admired this girl in second grade. And I wanted to be her. And I imagined I was her. I had her mind and body and her cool mom. But I also had her mind, you know, her abilities. So just imagining I could be this girl or wanting to be this girl suggested there's an I that exists separate from mind and body, right? The switch. In the text it actually talks about that, like a merchant exchanging goods, like as if the self were to exist in such a way that you could exchange it with another person's self. I mean, I knew it wasn't possible, but not because I thought ourselves didn't exist separately, right? Yeah, so therefore the sense of an independent, self-sufficient, substantially existent I is also the sense that you may swap with another person, that the I could actually be exchanged for someone else. I want to have a Buddha's. Now I don't want that second grade girls. I want to have a Buddha's. I want to have a Buddha's I, right? Okay, but the point being, therefore, we distinguish between a self-sufficient, substantially existent I that is dependent on mind and body, and one that isn't. And first you get rid of the type where it's independent, and then you get rid of the second type. And then lastly, you realize, well, not only is there no controller and no utilizer, no, there's nothing coming from the side of the object. That's the deepest and the most difficult to understand. I did say it last time, but I just wanted to stress it again. Now, the second type here has two aspects. The second type has two kinds. The second type can be either a mind, it can be great compassion that is directly conjoined with the mind that realizes the impermanence of sentient beings, or alternatively, it is directly conjoined with the mind that realizes the lack of a self-sufficient substantial I. Does that make sense? I'll say it again. So, the first type is out. The first type is just compassion itself. So the first type is not even an option. The third type of compassion is only conjoined with the mind that realizes the emptiness. It's directly conjoined with the mind that realizes the emptiness of sentient beings, right? The second type has there are two possibilities. It can be conjoined with directly conjoined with a mind that realizes the impermanence of sentient beings, or alternatively, it's a mind that is conjoined with, it's directly conjoined with the mind that realizes the lack of self-sufficient and substantial existence of all sentient beings. Right? But the question is, why just not have a third time, not another time? Why, right? Why is it, well, I don't know, for whatever reason, they only talked about 3 and said there's 3 types of great compassion, and the second type has 2 possibilities. That's what is also mentioned in this text. Yeah, because you need one to realize the subtlest type of selflessness, that's emptiness, that's the third type, and then the other 2 which take you closer to realizing emptiness. Right? Understanding the impermanence of sentient beings and understanding that they're not self-sufficient and substantially existent. Yeah? In that way it makes sense. So phenomenal reality that is not emptiness, impermanence, and lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent I, therefore that's part of the second category. And then you have the third category where great compassion is conjoined with the mind realizing the emptiness of sentient beings. Yep. Yeah. Does that make sense? It's all a little complicated, but you get used to it, yes.
So, about the second type of great compassion, so Laurence sometimes said that if you realize the impermanence of sentient beings, you negate the permanent unitary.
But say again, Dhamma Tsongkhapa said what? When you realize the impermanence of sentient beings, then?
When you negate the permanent unitary independent self.
Permanent part, yeah, unitary, yeah, autonomous self.
He
Yeah.
said that one is then able to ascertain the absence of self-sufficiency, essentially self. But this is more subtle than impermanence, right? It's not immediate from seeing the impermanence of
Yes.
sentient being, it's another.
Yes.
Right?
When you, what it says literally here is, when you realize that sentient beings are impermanent, then that mind that apprehends sentient beings as all 3, permanent, unitary, and autonomous, that ceases. But you may still hold on to sentient beings being unitary and autonomous, but not all 3. Yes, so that is more difficult. I'm not sure it's more difficult for everyone.
I meant not this one, but the self-sufficiency essentially.
Oh, okay.
But then it also seems that
Yes.
2 different objects are different also in their subtlety.
Yes. That's more difficult. So here, as it describes here, first you understand that sentient beings lack permanence. So sentient beings are impermanent. You realize that. Then you realize that the self doesn't exist as a separate unitary entity. And only then can you realize that they are not self-sufficient, substantially existent. In other words, there's no self that's a controller. Right? And after that you can realize emptiness. So this order, it has to be, this is important to understand this. Although we don't innately have a sense of a permanent, partless, independent self, but we have an acquired sense, and that doesn't have to be intellectually, it doesn't have to be that intellectual or philosophical. Cultural, it can be cultural, for instance, the sense of notion of a soul, for instance, that's part of our culture. Intellectual, yes, the ego, the superego. But first we need to understand that there is no permanent. We have an innate sense of an I, of a permanent I. I think we do. There is a bit of debate in it. Some would say no, it's intellectually acquired. But there's also, there are other texts that seem to definitely suggest there's also an innate version. So an innate version of I'm permanent, right? I'm the self, I keep saying that, the same self that came into this room this morning, there's the same, the sense that came into this room is the same self, right? So the same self that's here right now is the same that came into the room. So that's a sense of permanence we all have. This we can let go earlier. We can understand fast that it's all changing, that if mind and body change, it has to change. And then we tackle the self-sufficient, substantially existent I. In other words, the sense of like a controller, right? That we need to, I mean, is there a controller? Do you have a sense the I is the controller of mind and body? Absolutely, right? Yeah. So when you're meditating and I'm asking to watch your own mind, then you have a sense of a controller. But what is actually watching your own mind? Pardon? The mind itself, right? So in this case, you have possibly two minds, one mind meditating and the other mind constantly checking. Possible that you have two minds, either it's alternating quickly.
Self-knower?
No, there's no self-knower in the highest school. There's no self-knower. Okay. Anyway, does that make sense? And only then, when you come to understand that controller is not there, then you can tackle the deepest level. All right. Sorry, I did spend a lot of time on this. I said it last time, but I wanted to stress it again, just to be sure everyone understands this. Because from everything that is to follow, you need to have that knowledge. When we move to the 6th chapter, this is extremely important. Okay, now I continue with reading. All right. Yes. So now I'm on page 62. Yeah, in both the root text, so Chandrakirti's root text and the commentary, his auto-commentary, the two latter compassions, directly conjoined with the realization of impermanence or the lack of a self-sufficient substantial I, and the third type, directly conjoined with emptiness. So these latter compassions are described as being qualified by two characteristics referred to above, while the first compassion is described as having sentient beings alone as its object, with no qualification by any of these characteristics. So neither impermanence nor emptiness and so forth. So the phrase compassion that takes sentient beings as its object actually is sentient beings that takes only sentient beings as its objects. That's really the first type of compassion. That too involves a truncation, where the word alone is left out. So previously, remember I talked about truncations last time. The mind, for instance, when we say compassion that focuses on phenomena. It's actually the longer version of that is compassion that takes phenomena. Taking sentient beings merely designated upon their phenomena, the aggregates, taking that as their object. That's what Lama Tsongkhapa says. He says that phenomena here refers to the aggregates. Phenomena here refers to the aggregates, he says. So usually it's said that phenomena refers to impermanence in other commentaries, but here he says the name for the second type of compassion that focuses on phenomena, is actually a truncation, a shorter version of saying compassion that is conjoined with the mind that takes sentient beings that are merely designated upon their aggregates. Right? That's a little weird because that's just the second type. Anyway, I can't say anything. That's how Lama Tsongkhapa describes it. Yeah, never mind. Anyway, and then the third type is described as compassion. The full name is compassion that is conjoined with a mind that takes no reference as its object. That's non-referential compassion. It's also a truncation. It's an abbreviated, a shorter version. And then as to the last type is compassion that takes sentient beings alone as its object. That's also a shorter version, is compassion that takes sentient beings as its object. Okay. In view of this, those who assert that the first compassion invariably takes as its object sentient beings characterized as permanent, unitary, and autonomous are saying something untenable. So someone may think, okay, unless you have the second type of compassion, unless you've developed compassion that runs parallel with the understanding that sentient beings are impermanent, every time you have great compassion, you perceive sentient beings to be permanent, partners, and independent. You may have that view, right? You may have that view. Just because you don't have that kind of compassion yet, you may misperceive. But that doesn't make sense. Because Lama Tsongkhapa says, even with respect to compassion that arises in the hearts of those who have not found the view of selflessness, on many occasions it can arise simply on the basis of merely taking sentient being as its object without qualifying it in any terms. So just because you haven't realized selflessness yet, it doesn't mean every time you perceive sentient beings you perceive them to exist inherently or as having an inherent self. Does that make sense? Because otherwise we would never perceive anything that's realistic. So right now, just because you haven't realized there's no permanent partners independent self, doesn't mean every time you perceive a self, you perceive it as being permanent partners independent. Right? Just because you don't realize that the self is impermanent yet, doesn't mean every time you think of yourself, you perceive it as permanent. You don't always perceive yourself as permanent. If I ask you, get a sense of yourself, is that the same or not? Yes, in that moment. But you also have a sense of a realistic sense every now and then. Because if you don't, you never perceive anything that exists. Right? Does this glass, do you perceive this glass? Yes, this glass exists. Do you perceive this glass as inherently existent? No, because if you did, you wouldn't perceive the glass. Right? If this glass appears as inherently existent, but your mind doesn't perceive it as such. If your mind were to actively perceive this to exist inherently, it would be a wrong consciousness. Its object wouldn't exist. So although we haven't understood yet that this object lacks inherent existence, we nevertheless don't always perceive it as inherently existent.
You gave an example with the wall, perceiving the wall.
Perceiving the wall, what about the wall?
You gave, I think, the similar example.
It's not that similar. Okay. All right, this is, when you perceive this wall, do you perceive the atoms of this wall? No. Do the atoms of this wall that are in the sphere of your vision, do they appear? They appear. Right. Okay, so they appear. And do they appear as changing? These atoms? They appear as changing because, like atoms are constantly in movement, aren't they? Which means they're always changing. So to your eye consciousness, this wall appears as impermanent. Simply because it appears with all its subtle atoms. And the movement, you can't say the movement doesn't appear or the atoms don't appear. Because you can't have a whole appearing without its parts. Does that make sense?
I never get it.
Okay. Can you have...
I've heard it so many times, but I still...
Okay, let me give you another example. When you walk down the street from Kirti Monastery, there is a mosaic. Do you call that a mosaic?
Yeah.
Of His Holiness. Little stones. How many may there be? Maybe 200? Not more than that. It's pretty coarse. So this mosaic, okay, when you look at that, when His Holiness appears to you, that's the whole. Does every single stone have to appear to you? Appear. You don't have to be aware of every single stone. But if one stone was missing, His Holiness's picture would be incomplete. So are they all appearing to you?
Yeah.
Okay. Is every atom on the surface of these appearing to you? Without being aware. You don't have to be aware of each stone in that mosaic. You've agreed. Every stone appears, but you're not aware of it. So, they all appear. Now let's take a computer screen. It's made of pixels, like a mosaic, but very subtle. Does each pixel appear? Okay. This far you agree? This far you agree, right? Okay, yeah. So, does each atom of each pixel appear? Right?
Must be, yeah.
Must be. That part? Okay, you still agree. Each atom of each pixel still agrees. And still since they can only appear with their movement, and that happens moment by moment, the impermanence appears as well. Would you agree?
I'm getting lost.
Getting closer. So this is where our appearance for a change is correct. They still appear as inherently existent because there's no contradiction. They appear to exist in and of itself. So the impermanence does appear, we're just not aware of it. And conceptually or mental, with our mental consciousness, we hold on to the permanence of phenomena. But at the same time, inherent existence appears. And here we're completely wrong with the appearance. Phenomena appear to exist from their own side. This seems to be a wall in its own right, nothing to do with my mind. So with the impermanence, we are, in terms of the appearance to our sense consciousnesses, I'm not talking about the mental consciousness, to our sense consciousnesses, impermanence appears the way it exists. In that respect, we're not mistaken. But unfortunately, on a deeper level, inherent existence, we are mistaken. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. How did I get there? How did I get there? Yes. Your question. It was your question. So, therefore, although every time I'm perceiving something, it appears to exist inherently, that doesn't mean I have to actively perceive it to exist inherently. Right? It appears to exist inherently, but I don't have to hold on to it, because otherwise I wouldn't see anything. Every time, because as long as I don't realize emptiness. So some people may think, as long as you don't realize emptiness, if you don't realize the lack of inherent existence, everything you perceive to be inherently existent. Some people may think that. But then you don't perceive anything. You don't perceive anything. When you perceive a table to exist inherently, you don't perceive a table. You perceive an inherently existent table, but a table doesn't exist inherently. Right? If you perceive an inherently existent table, you don't perceive a table that is in actuality non-inherently existent. So then you don't perceive nothing, I was going to say. You don't perceive anything. And then you have no realistic mind. I mean, where are we going to start if all our minds are wrong consciousnesses? No. We still perceive without thinking about it. It appears to inherently exist, but I perceive a glass. I perceive a glass. Right? Okay. There are some who disagree. Some would disagree. And I get why they say that, but I'm not going to go into who disagrees. Some of the other traditions, the non-Gelug traditions, they would disagree. And I get where they're coming from. It makes sense. But in this tradition, Lama Tsongkhapa very much stresses that we do perceive things without holding on to their inherent existence, for instance. Right? So what we perceive conventionally exist. Certain things. Okay. Anyway, so that's the whole argument here. So just because you haven't realized that phenomena lack, or that the self lacks permanence, that a self doesn't exist permanent, unitary, and as an autonomous self, unless you realize that, you would always perceive it that way. That doesn't make any sense. So, for instance, he says, in case of those who have found the common level view of selflessness. Some of the words are weird. The commonly accepted selflessness would be a better translation, I think. The commonly accepted view of selflessness. All the Buddhist school accept this selflessness. What is that selflessness? A type of selflessness that all the Buddhist schools, Vaibhashika, Sautantrika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamika assert. What kind of selflessness is that? The lack of a
self-sufficient, substantially existent self.
Lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, and impermanent, partners, independent. So, all Buddhist schools, Vaibhashika, Sautantrika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamika agree there is no permanent, partners, independent self. There is no self-sufficient, substantially existent self. But except for the Prasangika, they all believe there's an inherent I. That's why we study these schools. You can't pull away the rug under our feet right away. We learn these schools. We start with the Vaibhashika. Everything exists inherently. Thank you very much. Sautrantrika. Everything exists inherently. Thank you very much. Chittamatra. Everything exists inherently, but not out there. Okay, dependent on the mind. Svatantrika. Everything out there, everything whatever exists, doesn't exist truly, but inherently. And only the last school, not inherently. Only then, because that's the hardest to understand. So you're negating. You remember what I told you about the schools, the Vaibhashika, the Sautrantrika, the Chittamatra, and the Svatantrika, not the Prasangika. How they differ. Okay, I'll tell you again. Vaibhashika and Sautrantrika tell us all external phenomena exist truly. They say the I doesn't exist as a controller, self-sufficiently, doesn't exist permanent, partners, independent, so they already tackle the I. I is out. The course of selflessness is explained. But they don't discuss external phenomena. They basically convey the idea that external phenomena exist as they appear to us. Out there, truly existent. Basically not really dependent on the mind. Not really, not dependent on the mind, really, for the existence. That's the first step. The first step we take when we study the lowest schools is we learn the self doesn't exist as permanent, partners, independent. It doesn't exist as a controller. But that's as far as it goes. External phenomena are not touched. Okay? Then you learn Chittamatra school. Same applies to the self. No permanent partners, independent self, no self-sufficient substantial I. Fine. But now external existence is negated. Nothing is out there. Only mind. So again, from everything out there exists, there's this objective reality that we just walk into. It's all there. Okay, the I we already tackled. We already talked about the I. But in the Vaibhashika and Sautrantrika, everything external remains the same. Then in the Chittamatra school, you go to the other extreme. There's nothing out there. Only mind. Mind still exists truly. So the focus is very much on the mind. That's a beautiful way of going from mind is not really important, everything is out there, to mind is extremely important, there's nothing out there. Right? And then you have Svatantrika. Nothing exists truly. It all depends on the mind. But the mind also doesn't exist truly. The mind also doesn't exist truly. And you have two types of Svatantrika. One that says nothing exists out there. So they like the Chittamatra, with one exception. The mind also doesn't exist truly. The Chittamatra says nothing exists out there. The mind exists truly. Then the Svatantrika following Yogacharya, or similar to the Chittamatra, they say nothing exists out there, but the mind doesn't either. Oh, the mind doesn't exist truly either. Nothing exists truly. Then you have the second type of Svatantrika that says there is external existence, but neither that exists truly, nor the mind exists truly. It only exists, all of this lacks true existence, which means it doesn't exist without appearing to a mind. That is still very coarse. So the Svatantrika school, they say, external existence doesn't exist truly, and the mind doesn't exist truly. Nothing exists truly. Everything exists inherently, but not truly. They make that distinction. Nothing exists inherently. Everything exists inherently, sorry. Everything exists inherently, but nothing truly. What does it mean to exist truly? It doesn't exist without appearing to a mind. It doesn't exist without appearing to a mind. So it only exists because it appears to a mind. But it inherently exists as a wall. This is a wall, right? This is a wall, but it exists inherently as a wall. It's a wall, it's a conventional wall. Well, it's an existent wall because it appears, because it exists inherently as a wall. Otherwise, they would argue wall, window, you wouldn't make a distinction. You couldn't differentiate between the two if there wasn't something from the side of the object. But it's only a wall because it appears to our mind. This is very interesting when it comes to modern science. What does modern science say? Does blue exist? Yes, blue exists. But only if it appears to a mind. Because it's light waves. In actuality, it's light waves. But they wouldn't say that this is not, what, maroon or, I don't know, whatever, purple or whatever color that is. All right? They wouldn't disagree, but they say it's only exists at this color because there's a brain, and so forth, whatever you need on the physical level, and there's a mind to perceive it, right? So, similarly, the Svatantrika school would say it's inherently purple. It's inherently purple because it's not blue. There's a distinction between the two. So from its own side, there's something there that distinguishes it from this blue object. However, it's not purple without appearing to a mind. What about sound? Sound is something very unique. Sound are pressure waves. Right? Sounds are pressure waves. So sound exists, but only what we call sound can only exist if it appears to a mind. Because we don't perceive pressure waves. We perceive music, for instance. Now, that inherently exists as music, but it doesn't exist truly because it needs a mind for it to be what it is. Makes sense, doesn't it? Does it make sense to you? Right? You still look like it's half a question mark. Not like you're full. The full question mark is gone. Right? So it's like you need a mind for the object to appear, for it to exist, but it still has an existence from its own side. What does the Prasangika school say? The Prasangika school says, yes, we agree. It needs a mind to exist. But on top of it, it doesn't exist inherently. It does not exist inherently. It does not exist beyond being merely labeled by the mind. Nothing can be found from the side of the object. Wow! That is like, don't take that away from me. It feels that way, doesn't it? It feels like, how can you still differentiate between this, that, and the other? It seems the difference between objects is only possible because there's something from the side of the object. But you can also see how we start off with the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantrika, then Chittamatra. It prepares our mind in a really skillful way. It makes our mind, it's like, you know, when you do yoga, your goal is to put your foot behind your head. But the first step is not that. You're going to injure yourself. You're going to fall into an extreme. Yeah? You slowly, further and further. It's still far from when you just lift it from the ground. It's still far away from here. But you're moving in that direction. You're making your body more flexible with every movement, closer to where you want to put your foot. Similarly, going through the Vaibhashika, Sautrantrika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamika Svatantrika. The first four. Actually, there are only 4 schools, but the 5th school being subdivided. So the first 3 and the first subdivision of the 4th school. They're making your mind more flexible. More and more you're able to, your brain, new synapses are created and so forth. All right. Therefore, it's extremely important to go through them. It's helpful to go through them to bring about that flexibility. But nevertheless, even without understanding all this, it doesn't mean we don't perceive anything. It doesn't mean we always perceive inherent existence, we always perceive. That's what Lama Tsongkhapa is trying to say here. I'm making this huge mistake. I ignore all these questions, yes. And then people delete them again when they realize they're not okay. All right. Okay. So sorry, B. B asked a lot of questions. B, please allow me to answer them next time. It would take too long to go through them. All right. Yeah, I'm forcing it. We're almost done. Oh no. We're almost done with the first part. Okay, never mind. We'll continue tomorrow. Never mind. We'll continue tomorrow. I hope I've got the basis today. I try to stress it over and over again. If someone is new tomorrow, I'm afraid I can't do it another time. But now I've got the basis for this really important part, and everything else is easier. And then we can finish the first part tomorrow, and finally start with the first, what's called the first ground. All right. We have time for maybe one last question. Well, B has asked a few questions. If you have a question, I'll take it. If not, no? Yes, go
Maybe
ahead.
just a very quick one then.
Yeah.
For inherently, we got Rangjin, right? For truly though, what's the word there? It's just Demba?
Dembarduba. Yeah, Demba. So you asked for the Tibetan. Rangxin in Tibetan. Rangxin Gedruba in Tibetan really means naturally existent or inherently existent. Demba means truth, or Demba, yeah.
It appears, Nama.
Nawa means appear, yeah. So B asked, when great compassion is active, wisdom can either be active or dormant. Please give examples. All right, when wisdom is active, you can give me example. I already said it. When great compassion is active, wisdom can either be active as well or lie dormant. When does it lie dormant? What type of wisdom lies dormant? Yes? The direct realization of emptiness. That can never, for a sentient being, cannot. It's a direct absorption. This is a direct absorption, and therefore can't run parallel with great compassion. But then give me an example of when great compassion is active, wisdom is also active.
The second and third types of great compassion.
Very good. The second and the third type of compassion. Yes, very good. Is there a self-sufficient, substantially existent self that is dependent on the aggregates? Is there a self-sufficient, substantially existent self that is dependent on the aggregates? No, is there? Does it exist? No, there is no self-sufficient, substantially existent self. But is there a mind that may perceive a self-sufficient, substantially existent self that is dependent on the aggregates? Yes. Gosh, right? I mean, our wrong views, there's no limit to our wrong views. Our mind is so good at creating new wrong views. If yes, how does it happen since it holds itself as a controller of the aggregates? Yeah, how's that even possible? On one hand, it's the controller, and on the one hand, it's dependent on the... Yeah, we are very good at holding contradictory views. It's the controller, and it's dependent. Yeah, we can make both work. We're very good at this. We're very good at inconsistencies. Is the innate self one or separate from the aggregates? Is this innate, is the innate sense of a self, I think is her question. Is the innate sense of a self, is that a sense of a separate I or a non-separate I? An I that is separate from the aggregates or not? Our innate sense. Not in, yeah, none. We don't have an innate sense. Myself is over here and the aggregates are over. Otherwise, we wouldn't say I feel shitty when our body feels shitty. Sorry for my French. We wouldn't say I feel sick, right? We naturally feel that if my body feels sick, I feel sick. If we were to innately have that sense they're totally separate, why would we say I'm unhappy when my mind is unhappy? So innately it feels as if the two are connected. But still the I is kind of like a separate controller. Not totally separate, but kind of separate. Does that make sense? It's really difficult to... These wrong views are very difficult to fathom, really. We're not even aware we have them.
The I is the conspiracy.
Pardon?
The eye is like the conspiracy.
It's not even the eye. It's the mind that grasps at the eye. It's like a conspirator. Yeah, it's the troublemaker.
That's why the conspiracy theorists, it's so easy for them to wield their shit, isn't it?
Right. Once they're on the wrong path, they just continue onto other wrong path. Absolutely. Okay, great. No, B, these questions are all appropriate and yeah, so some of them I was able to address. Okay, great, wonderful. So we'll meet again tomorrow, and I'll finish this part tomorrow. Okay, so lock the door. No one else is allowed to come. So I don't explain everything. No, I'm kidding. All right, so let's take a moment to dedicate whatever positive potential we've accumulated together so that it may not get lost. Instead, let's first of all dedicate it towards our own enlightenment. Maybe swiftly remove all these wrong views regarding the self and instead generate method and wisdom so that we will eventually attain the enlightened state of a Buddha for the benefit of every sentient being. But may our positive potential also cause our great spiritual masters, embodiments of the Dharma, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to have long and healthy lives, to continue to inspire and teach us. And lastly, may whatever positive potential we've accumulated reduce all the conflicts, the wars in this world, and especially help those responsible for these wars and conflicts to find more wisdom and more compassion in their hearts. So with this in mind, let's recite the prayers. In the snow-encircled land, you are the source of benefit and bliss. Avalokiteshvara Tenzin Gyatso, please remain in life until samsara ends. The brave Manjushri and also Samantabhadra realize things as they are. Hence, in order to be able to follow their example, I dedicate these merits in the best way. With the dedication praised as supreme by the victorious ones of the 3 times, I completely dedicate all these roots of virtue so that I might engage in the noble bodhisattva deeds. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Okay, thank you, and see you tomorrow.